Paul, I'm so grateful that you're here to be able to share your insights, your research, you know, in terms of like this amazing topic. And I have to say, for the people watching, it's a treat to have Paul because he thinks differently, he speaks differently, and I'm just going to be hanging on to every word. So thank you, Paul. If you want to say more about who you are and what you're up to, please feel free. And yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Wow. Oh my gosh, Adele, you just said that. I mean, I would just say in true Burning Man culture that like the gift you're giving me, I want to give right back. I think Adele, Dr. LaFrance, Adele, however, her new play name when she's in the desert, like I can think even more differently. I can think even more uniquely because of our bond. I'm going to say a little bit more about that once I'm in the presentation, but I'm going to just get into it if that's okay with everybody. I am so happy and so profoundly honored to be able to offer this talk on the virtual playa about the inner healing intelligence, a concept that has been developed by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, a principle that has been upheld by the underground psychedelic movements and indigenous cultures for countless years, countless eons. And I believe a guiding principle to the future of psychotherapy and a waypoint for perhaps the Renaissance. I'm going to focus, I could take a huge, beautiful, big view about it. But right now, I'm just going to focus on how the inner healing intelligence, how embodied and nonlinear processes find themselves in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So I should probably say just a few things about like why am I thinking about this? Why am I appreciating this? Well, I am very fortunate to be training for the MDMA and eating disorders study under the great, fearless, and joyful leadership of Adele LaFrance. And part of our training last year at Asheville was to discuss the inner healing intelligence at length. And I just thought it was so cool, such a nifty proposition, such a useful idea that I've brought it into my own practice, not even waiting for MDMA to assist me. And I've just come to appreciate it deeply. So a lot of this discussion will just be my appreciation for this concept that I hope I can describe as helpful in your practice, whether working with psychedelics or not. All right, this picture is a reminder for me to thank Adele LaFrance properly. I think you, Adele is so cool in so many ways. I hope she gives a talk. I hope the play gets to feel her presence and how she inspires the people that she works with. I just want to say to anyone out there listening to this, watching this, you want to find a friend and a mentor who lives like Michael Jordan and makes you feel like Michael Jordan. Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Obviously. All right. And so welcome. Welcome to you out there. I don't know your name. Like, hi. I want to treat this exactly like a playa talk. Like, we just met in a dusty tent with all kinds of beautiful activities surrounding us. Maybe not getting sleep from a beautiful night, maybe like waiting and excited for the sunset to come. I want to invite people who've been to the burn to remember their favorite experiences of being on playa. And if you're new, if you have yet to come to Black Rock City to kiss the ground, to be welcomed home, I want to invite you to imagine it as I share my favorite experience of Burning Man. My favorite experience is just the sound of bicycles. So many bicycles, no cars, just bicycles crisscrossing the desert, all kinds of bells. And as we're there, I want to take time to acknowledge and respect and revere the guardians of the land that surrounds us, that holds us. At Burning Man, 5 tribes, or 5 nations, are recognized as the stewards of the land. The Southern and Northern Paiutes, the Goshutes, the Shoshones, and the Washos. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And this place is stewarded by the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Western society, in all of its expressions, and psychedelic history and the Renaissance particularly, have a great deal of gratitude and respect owed to the guardians of this land, the protectors of wisdom. And it's our responsibility as settlers, as people who benefit on the land and its learning, to find ways to dedicate the merit of our work to that reconciliation. I want to share that a land acknowledgement is only powerful if it guides our learning and our life. And for me, I'm about to present a lot of concepts that I am such a big fan of, that I treasure and that help me. And I want to extend the horizon of that knowledge into Indigenous forms of knowledge. And I hope very soon in my career, I'll be able to find ways to integrate that. I hold that goal in mind. And if you're listening out there and you have ideas, please reach out to me and give me a way to speak with respect and reverence to our stewards. So coming back to what I'm here to talk about, I want to chart out the things I'm going to be discussing. I'm going to be talking about the inner healing intelligence as a framing of client autonomy. In psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, we are having a conversation about trauma, but we're also having a conversation about reality and knowledge. And the inner healing intelligence is a very important way of having that conversation by identifying that in psychedelic assisted healing, and I say in all forms of healing, there's a multimodal, nonlinear, and emergent process at work within ourselves as we seek to make sense of the world we know to guide us into the world that we believe in. There are practices and attitudes that support this multimodal, nonlinear, and emergent process. But these practices and attitudes are challenged by personal and structural factors, by our personal histories, by the weight of history across culture, by the pressures we face in a capitalist society that challenge that work. And we can better prepare ourselves for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy by cultivating the very attitudes and stances that all therapies require to support the true autonomy and self-liberation of the people we serve. So before I talk about how the inner healing intelligence helps psychotherapy, I think it's very important to discuss what is psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is commonly identified as the talking cure, which states and implies that there's healing to be done in the dialogue between people. That healing is a healing, I think, about reality. All the time, we are engaging with the world from a perspective of reality, an idea of what's real. And we co-create that idea of reality in our lives with our families, with our friends, with strangers down the street, with the people that we work with the people who test us. We're constantly creating reality, constantly defining reality. What is real? What is true? Is it true that we are all deeply connected? Is a forest as real as my income? Whose lives matter? And how do I live in a way that respects what I know is true? When people come to psychotherapy, they have a problem with reality, or at least they have a problem with their model of reality. They may deeply believe that in some way they're unworthy of the days that are given to them. Or they may detect that people do not see them as they see themselves, or something is amiss or astray in the way they proceed and express their lives among others. These are all statements and questions about reality, and psychotherapy is a privileged discussion about that reality. Therapists are trusted to help a person look at and examine the concepts that guide their lives. And ideally, psychotherapy helps people to discover and practice new ways of understanding reality and being with what's real. I think psychotherapy is just One of the coolest things a human being can ever do, because we're just investigating so meticulously
Mhm.
how we come to know what reality is. You know, we look at what a person says and the ideas behind those words. We look at what a person does and how they say it, or what they don't say. We look at the relationship that exists when people speak, and we look at the meaning that is generated from moment to moment across days and weeks and lifetimes to understand how a person lives with the world. This question of how do we live with the world, at least in a Western psychological context, necessarily brings in the brain. Western science has identified that the brain in some way is crucial to mediating the world that we live in and the inner life that tries to find its place in the world. And currently, brains and minds are understood to be crucial to navigating reality through a stable sense of self in the world. What has helped human beings, Homo sapiens, evolve so productively, effectively in the planet to the point where we live all over the world and we are literally changing the nature of planet Earth is that we are able to understand change and to influence change by models, by ways of understanding how things work and what we can do about it. Every human being, as they grow up, develops a model of how the world works and what our horizon of agency is, what choices we can make to change the changing world. Different experiences influence how these models are made. Repeated experiences and intense experiences definitively change and orient and organize the models we have around the way we see ourselves, the people around us in the world. So when people exist in a toxic, hostile environment, then of course they come to live and adapt and survive a world where everyone is hostile. If someone has had a traumatizing experience that overwhelms their physical capacity to adapt, then that adaptation of non adaptation persists, trying to make sense of that terrible experience. Repeated and intense experiences then become entrenched ways of perceiving the self in the world. Part of the efficiency of human minds is our ability to predict the world as much as we perceive it. There's a growing body of evidence that a lot of our phenomenological experience, a lot of what we see and feel and hear and think are actually predicted well before we actually experience the world. And a lot of the new information that might change our models of the world get filtered out as we hold on to the models of the world that has helped us survive the past, continuing in one of the most evolutionary adaptive mechanisms that people have to survive the world, making a model and applying it to the world. Robin Carhart Harris is the Jacques Cousteau of neurophysiology right now. He's just doing amazing work and writing exquisite papers that chart how the brain exists in ordinary states and how non-ordinary states of consciousness might challenge and produce opportunities for the brain and our experience to reorganize ourselves. And he says, we propose that many, if not most, psychopathologies develop via the gradual entrenchment of pathological thoughts and beliefs, plus aberrant beliefs held at a high level. Robin Carhart Harris believes that we often exert a top-down influence over our life, which is to say that those repeated and intense experiences that guide and orient our most deeply held beliefs, for example, that people are dangerous or that I am worthless, they become the organizing features of our lives because our brain has grown around these ideas. The brain does not hold ideas the way we might hold on to a mallet, but rather it forms in patterns and thoughts. The default mode network is a representation or a concept that describes this pattern of connection and thought, the dominoes and the patterns that present themselves. And like a song, there may be a chorus. And for people who come to psychotherapy, that chorus may be something damaging and deeply painful, like I'm not worth it and I can't do anything. Those choruses have come from a life experience that makes such ideas make sense. But then it doesn't make sense outside of the toxic, hostile, or traumatic environment, which propels people to question, what do I really know? It propels them to come to therapy. Now, there are many therapies, and it's a very well common understanding that no therapy is a winner in the race to prove its efficacy or its success over other therapies. I've come to think, having studied many, many therapies now, I think I geek out on therapies so much. Like I watch therapy videos the way you might watch sports videos. What I've come to think is that therapies, the therapies that we have in the West, approach different aspects of experience, different facets of the default mode network. Different people, as they grow in their lives through their different environments, hold different beliefs, and different beliefs hold different priorities. Sometimes the source of our suffering is located in the stories we tell ourselves, the very history that we live and live out. That's the domain of psychodynamic psychotherapy. So other ways in which we find difficulty with our models of reality happen in our thoughts, what we think and how we think, the work of CBT. Whereas other people, their models, their default mode network often gets stuck in the feelings we have about feelings about feelings. We grew up learning that we should be afraid of getting angry when we're sad because we've been told and we've learned that sadness is dangerous because it exploits you and leaves you vulnerable to harm, and anger makes you a bad person, and stop feeling so anxious. That sort of layering is the domain of emotion-focused therapy. While a whole new wing of psychotherapies are emerging that places value and centers the body's intelligence, that there are things that we know that can't be put into words, that trauma can be deeply encoded in what we experience in our body and what our bodies want to do. I think Pat Ogden and sensory motor psychotherapy has a beautiful map of these different processes that come to develop the default mode network through our thoughts, our emotions, our perception, how we move, our action impulses, and the very visceral sensations we wake up to, live with, and go to sleep with at night. Again, therapies are approximations of healing. We can only look, because of the constraints of language, we can only talk about one thing as we develop a theory. It's necessary that therapies provide an approximation of common processes of healing because each person's life, each person's model of reality is uniquely developed. If you think of wings, different animals across the animal kingdoms have developed different ways of flying. An insect's wing is different than a bird's wing, which is different than what a flying squirrel uses to soar through the trees. They all share the property of flight, but they work differently. They've evolved, they have different histories. So too with the evolution of human lives, I think, with the way we've come to survive into our past, our toxic, difficult childhoods, into our adult problems. To actually make sense of the way we have adapted and then met difficulty with the way we negotiate reality, we have to be able to take that unique evolution seriously. The means by which a person resolves their personal convictions, past conflicts, embodied inhibitions, advances their capacity to be with themselves, others, and the world in a way that's fundamentally unique. Which is to say something that Irvin Yalom said: the therapist must strive to create a new therapy for each patient. When I see people at the Artists Health Center, I should mention I'm a psychotherapist primarily for artists. I'm struck by the changing array of therapies that I have to rely on to help a person feel safe, to help a person feel curious, to help a person believe in what they discover from the curiosity, for a person to develop the courage to act on what they truly know. I'm describing a linear process, but maybe we have to have a conversation about mood regulation. Maybe we have to start with a conversation of how safe they feel in the room. Maybe we have to have a conversation of how to feel safe in your body. It all depends on the person who sits in front of you and the history they bring before you. Now, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Psychotherapy remains a dialogue and a practice of renegotiating and recreating new ways of knowing the world. And psychedelic experience supports that by inhibiting the default mode network, that chain of dominoes that helps us predict the world. Various psychedelics inhibit and pause that continuous calibration of predicting the world. I draw your attention to the picture on the slide. It's a beautiful representation of the functional connectivity of different brain regions under the influence of psychedelics. On the left side, you see the different regions of the brain color-coded. This is your brain not on drugs. This is the default mode network. And you can see that in efficiency and adaptation to the world, there are only a few connections between regions of the brain. But when the default mode network is inhibited, primarily through the serotonergic activation of psychedelics, that inhibition is reduced. And then suddenly brain regions talk to each other the way you might on the desert, at a cool art gathering. You meet all these strangers and you just go around shaking hands, saying hi, telling your playa name. The brain kind of becomes like that, I think. So in the reduction of the default mode network's priority and reducing what Robin Carhart Harris described as the weight or the priority of the brain's predictive models, there's a new chance for the brain to reorganize itself and take in new information and recreate models of the world. Which means that when a psychedelic is taken in and when a person is in the experience of medicine, the set and the setting, the data, the input that the person receives inside and around them is so crucial because it will play a defining role in what a person comes to believe and recognize about themselves as they reconstruct their understanding of the world. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists work to support a tailored, embodied, and adaptive model of the world and self. We are not just talking about trauma. We're not just talking about depression. We're not just helping people to feel better, but actually we're having a profound conversation about how to relate to thought and feeling, how to think, how to feel, what do we take seriously in what we know of the world. And at least in the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and I'm sure in many underground cultures, and certainly in indigenous cultures, there are two principles, I believe, that these cultures live by. One is that the world is a vibrant and diverse realm with safer spaces for all. And the other is that the individual who seeks healing has the agency to forge meaning and engage in meaningful action. These are simple, subtle ideas, but they're actually very crucial to what kind of healing takes place when people come to therapy, psychedelics or not. So understanding that context, that we are trying to help people heal their pain by renegotiating the way they understand the world, it's a good time to talk about the inner healing intelligence. It's a concept that was initially coined by Dr. Stanislav Grof, one of the great-grandfathers of psychedelic medicine. And it was refined by Dr. Michael Mithoefer and others with MAPS. The MAPS MDMA therapy manual is freely available and open for anyone to see. And if you take a peek at that manual, you'll find their definition of the inner healing intelligence as a person's innate capacity to heal the wounds of trauma. An innate healing capacity that people have what it takes to heal themselves. I want to highlight that this idea is not just in this amazingly articulate and erudite manual, but it's described across various cultures, such as intuition, an inner healer, bodhicitta, or Buddha nature, the higher self, great spirit, or source. Inner healing intelligence is not a thing. It's not a region of the brain that you can find on an fMRI scanner. It's not a neurotransmitter. I want to stress that MDMA assisted psychotherapy is not MDMA therapy. The MDMA may support the functioning of the inner healing intelligence, or at least make its probably continuous functioning obvious to the person who seeks therapy, but it doesn't make the inner healing intelligence. It's continuously available. It just may make it more apparent to us, and make us more readily available to work with the knowledge that this inner healing intelligence imparts. Shannon Carlin, an excellent educator, wrote, and therapist, and excellent human being all around, wrote in the Matt Winter Bulletin about the inner healing intelligence, and she provided a wonderful concept that described it. She says, like plants, our consciousness naturally flourishes when given a safe and supportive environment and encouragement. Accessing this inner healing intelligence is a process of honoring and expressing strength from within, coming from a place beyond mental chatter, vis-a-vis the default mode network, and negative self-talk trauma, from alignment and clarity. I think this is such an exquisite metaphor, because there's no inner healing intelligence in a plant. You can't find where inner healing intelligence is in the stems or in the leaf. It's just in the entire organization of the plant. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapies recognize the same organizing principle. As I said, it's a principle. It's a way we're describing a process, organicity, that emerges in all kinds of settings. You find the inner healing intelligence, or expression of whatever we're pointing at when we point at the inner healing intelligence, when you find great people improvising on the playa, when you find great, deep, wonderful conversations where someone you met from far away bumps into you on Tutu Tuesday and talks to you about their life in a way that deeply reaches into you. That understanding, I think, is inner healing intelligence. And again, the psychotherapies which seek to cultivate self-learning and self-healing have various names for it. Psychoanalysis calls it the unconscious. There's self-energy. There's wise mind, according to DBT. Self-energy, of course, being a concept derived from internal family systems, one of the deep, influential, and guiding therapies for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. Inner healing intelligence refers to an inner process that exists in the patient somehow, not in that neurotransmitter brain region way, but a capacity that can organize a person's experience towards greater agency and freedom, which is to say that the inner healing intelligence, if we pretended that it was a thing, it knows and unfolds the unique healing path for a person to know themselves in all of their complex history. It's important to recognize that the inner healing intelligence is a principle, because as a principle, we can use it to provide the most effective setting for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. We can create the conditions that allows a person to reorganize themselves in a way that creates a more enduring and compassionate default mode network. And some of the implications of this process involve principles that we have to hold on to from moment to moment in the 8-hour marathon of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and beyond. We need to acknowledge that no aspect, no event within therapy can be easily dismissed. What a person is thinking about, remembering, or enacting may be very necessary to understanding and bringing compassion to move on to what we think the therapy is about. And finally, the patient fundamentally drives the therapy in their engagement with their experience and emerging meaning. This is a profound point, that therapy must begin with respect for the patient's sovereignty and their authority over their own experience. And that therapy is, once again, not just a conversation about pain, but a conversation about freedom, the patient's freedom. to make meaning, to live life according to the dreams they have and what makes life worth living. I want to take some time to describe the inner healing intelligence. Again, making really clear, I don't think that the inner healing intelligence is a neighborhood in your brain. It's not a neurotransmitter. It's an innate capacity to organize itself, but of a human being's life and mind to organize itself. But when we see this organization, when we see this capacity, how do we know it's there? I'm going to describe these qualities, and I want to invoke or bring to mind the parable of the four blind men and the elephant. When there were four blind men and they came across an elephant, and each blind man held on to a different part of the elephant, and they were convinced that it was different properties. If you held on to the trunk, it was a rope or a snake. If you held on to the legs, it was a tree stump. If you hold on to the ears, it's leather. If you hold on to the tail, it's a furry mouse. But it's all of these things. And depending on where you are in the therapy, you will notice different components of this inner healing intelligence as it works through the healing of the person who seeks therapy. One quality is emergence. There's a sudden, often blinding, but sometimes gradual quality where crucial ideas, crucial insights around a person's life, new ways of thinking come out of nowhere. I want to argue continuously that the inner healing intelligence is an everyday, ordinary experience. We just may not be attuned to it or notice it as such. Think about a time where you were walking down the street and something clicked. You realize, oh, she wasn't mad at me. She was nervous. Or I am so hungry and I'm not mad at anybody. I'm hangry. I invite you to consider that those ideas have this sudden emergent quality. It's like the sound of this bell. Oops. Aha! Ooh, eureka. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy does not do anything different. It just provides a bigger, deeper recognition. It has the same property, which is to say it's a lot like this bell. It's deep. It's far-reaching. It recognizes and integrates many experiences across time. How do we get to this sound? The inner healing intelligence is known through many, many experiences across decades to be quite nonlinear. You may go from thinking you're going to die, to thinking about your family, to thinking about a tension in your chest, to coming to the trauma. You may start with a trauma, then go into a fear of spiders, then think about how lovely the people who are accompanying you on your journey are, to thinking about how thirsty you are and how you often don't recognize your bodily needs. The non-linearity of the inner healing intelligence suggests that there's no clear-cut, no step-by-step way to achieve healing, which means we have to be on our toes, respecting and continuously allowing the unfolding of human consciousness make sense of the world and its history, which again speaks to another important element of the inner healing intelligence. It has this unconscious, not me quality. One of the great powers and strengths of the inner healing intelligence is it reduces the sense of alienation that a person has when all of these deep insights come up, that they can take it seriously, that this is normal, that not normal in the sense that everybody has this experience all the time, but that this is one of the underlying processes that are happening as we seek to be one with the world. The inner healing intelligence is also multimodal. It's not just thoughts. It's not just feelings. It's not just the body. Michael Mithoefer wrote a wonderful article that summarizes how MDMA-assisted psychotherapy involves different modalities of psychotherapy. And I think that's because the inner healing intelligence will use whatever it needs. That process of healing will get into any experience that will help create sense and meaning. So for some people, they're going to experience memories. For other people, they're going to experience the tensions and the impulses in their bodies. For other people, they're going to be driven by communication. between that multimodal nature, its emergence, the nonlinearity that it can jump from one thing to another, the unconscious nature of it, therapists in the psychedelic assisted setting have like their work cut out for them. And something that's really, I find touching and powerful is the last part, the last quality that I want to argue for the inner healing intelligence. Across many accounts of psychedelic experience and reported often in the MAP studies is a sense of caring, a sense that what a person is experiencing, what they're making sense of, matters and is important and is cherished. Cherished by who? That experience of not me is so compelling. And I don't have anything else to say about that, because that's quite on the horizon of metaphysics and like statements about reality. But I think the common experience of care in self-healing is worth a thought. It's worth feeling. So we've talked about the inner healing intelligence. What does the psychedelic assisted psychotherapist do with the inner healing intelligence? Well, hopefully you've come to the same conclusion that I've been trying to suggest, which is the therapist doesn't do anything with or to the inner healing intelligence. The inner healing intelligence and the human being who comes to work with us is not broken. We can't fix them like IKEA furniture. There's an unfolding that has to happen. Recall Shannon Carlin's idea of the inner healing intelligence and the human being as an organism that grows. This is quite challenging, and I'll go into this more fully, because as psychotherapists, we're driven by our language, by our training, by our collegiality to see our work as doing things and completing certain tasks across timelines. One of the defining elements of the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy training by MAPS is to emphasize that the psychotherapist must adopt a non-directive approach, that we're not here to give answers, but to support the asking of the question and the listening for a patient's own answer. So when I ask, what is autonomy in a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, I like to think that autonomy represents liberation. It represents it points to the respect and reverence we have to a person's history and their ability to make sense of that history and that past into a future that feels safer and a future that's worth working towards. Autonomy is, I believe, the harvest of the inner healing intelligence, reorienting ourselves to this wonder we call the world, that we can live in it, that we can call it home. So if we're not doing something to the inner healing intelligence, well, how can we support the inner healing intelligence? And reading across, well, it's a very good question that I'm asking myself. And what I would like to say is that what we can do to support the inner healing intelligence, the emergence of nonlinear healing patterns during the halt of the default mode network as produced by psychedelics, is we can support and make sure that the patient recognizes that these nonlinear experiences are real. In the preparatory sessions, the MAPS manual stresses to introduce the concept of the inner healing intelligence, to develop the expectation that non-linear, multimodal, emergent, deep experiences full of a sense of care will come up, and to be open to the fact that these experiences are real. You also want to make sure that a patient isn't worrying about anything else and paying attention to their unfolding experience, which means to create a setting of security and support. We do this through the same principles that guide almost all psychotherapies, learning about a patient's beliefs and history and needs extensively. We validate and reinforce a patient's ideas and needs and questions. And we also empathically follow what the patient is thinking. Empathy is so crucial, not simply to help a patient feel good, but for them to understand that their ideas and their questions are worthwhile, that they are part of the puzzle of healing just as much as any theoretical idea or psychotherapeutic narrative. And crucially, it's important to inquire about and secure agreement around physical safety. I hope I don't have to go into that. I trust that I don't. In the picture, you'll see Michael Mithoefer and his partner, Annie Mithoefer, a power couple in the world of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with one of the trial participants. And I've included something that they would say. We view our best role is to facilitate your own inner healing intelligence, and we trust what comes up is what needs to come up. I put those quotes out there to emphasize that we have to model a trust in emergent properties. We have to show that we take what can happen within very seriously. During the therapy, during the preparatory sessions, during the actual experimental or medicine session, and into the integration, we must avoid imposing theoretical frameworks on the patient's understanding and experience. I think this is because part of the healing aspect of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is restoring a sense of patient and client autonomy, as an autonomy over meaning and reality. That's a picture of Stanislav Grof, who I said is one of the grandfathers and one of the originators of the idea of the inner healing intelligence. And I loved an anecdote that was brought up in the MDMA-assisted psychedelic psychotherapy training when Dr. Michael Mithoefer shared an anecdote with Dr. Grof. A student asked Dr. Grof how he would approach someone who seemed to be manipulating rather than having a genuine spontaneous process. This question could have elicited a lengthy and erudite discussion of psychodynamics, of which Stan was certainly capable of after many years of psychoanalytic training earlier in his career. But Stan responded with this statement: "In that situation, I prefer to believe something is happening that I do not understand." That's such a crucial illustration of the attitudes required to support the inner healing intelligence, because we are, by avoiding imposing theoretical frameworks, we are avoiding doing violence to a person's self-understanding. Think of the many times I am thinking of a person who I'm very close to, who said, of one of his therapies, "I went into the therapy, I talked about my problems, and then my therapist just tried to get me to talk about my dad." And I was like, "I'm fine with my dad." And the therapist was like, "No, you totally have to be messed up about your dad. I mean, I'm messed up about my dad." That's an illustration of therapeutic epistemological violence. A person is saying, this isn't true for me. And if we try to force our model onto a person, then we are impairing, impeding, and fostering distrust in a person's belief in themselves and what they know and how they know. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is a venue, a forum, an opportunity to welcome and come into oneself, just like the burn is for many of us. And this therapist has a great and deep responsibility to support that self-understanding. And one way we can support and guarantee that self-understanding is through beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is a concept that was introduced by Shinryu Suzuki, who is a famous Buddhist monk who helped bring Japanese Zen Buddhism to the West. He says in his crucial book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, "In the mind of the beginner, there are many possibilities, but in the mind of the expert, there are few." It mirrors and reflects that the experiences and the attitudes that Dr. Grof exhibits in the anecdote I just shared. Beginner's mind is marked by openness, eagerness, and a lack of preconceptions. Again, I want to stress, in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, a patient is profoundly sensitive and receptive to cues. Their default mode network is down. The very thing that organizes a person and predicts the world is down. So they will take every experience, they may take every experience that happens in the room, in the conversation, very seriously. They are sensitive, not just to words and sentences, but silences and the tone of voice and how people move. I'm thinking of a training or an exercise where Dr. LaFrance and I pretended to do psychotherapy, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. No medicine was used, but we were just simulating what would it be like to actively listen. And I kept using hmm, that Adele was like, Paul, you got to stop doing that. And I knew instantly she was right. Because even in there's an expert's mind. I'm thinking this is what a therapist does. They like they prove they're active listening. And that has nothing to do with the reality unfolding before us, between us. Beginner's mind is a concept that helps return us to thinking about the verbal, paraverbal, and nonverbal gestures that happen in therapy to make sure that we are continuously conveying interest, curiosity, and confidence in unfolding experience to grant the patient the chance to access meaning, their own meaning. So in active therapy, we are mostly getting out of the way and helping the patient get into their own way. One of the most important means of supporting the inner healing intelligence is making sure that when a person is in medicine, that their physical and emotional needs are met. We are providing water, we are helping people move to the bathroom, we are providing support, we are anticipating needs. And again, we're providing physical safety, possibly through contact, only according to the agreements that we have established beforehand. As a person goes through their medicine experience, the MDMA-assisted psychotherapists and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists encourage witnessing and experiencing with warmth and curiosity. Here's Dr. Mithoefer with another line to convey the attitude that the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist brings to the patient and their inner healing intelligence. We are here to support you in your process. This day is for you. We will be here with you. We encourage you to ask for what you need, and we'll also do our very best to anticipate your needs. There are no silly questions. We invite you to express yourself in any way that feels right. There's a whole open field there beyond right and wrong. And that's where the patient is going to find themselves. As the therapy with medicine proceeds, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists monitor the depth of the patient communications and encourage going back inside. Verbally, that might look like a therapist saying, we encourage you to go inside. This might be a good time to go inside. Of course, keeping in mind that some patients may actually need help communicating. Again, different people have different needs because of different histories on this world that we share. And so it will be up to the therapist to determine what's required. I draw attention to the idea of depth. Where does depth come from? How do we know what depth is? Well, I want to suggest that it comes from our body and our present-minded experience, which I will get to. After the medicine experience and into integration, it's crucial for therapists to convey confidence in the emerging coherence and intelligence of experiences experienced in the therapy. I think of an experience or a story that Ram Dass shared with his mom. Ram Dass met his mom as she was dying, and in the hospital, she was so medicated that she had a non-ordinary experience, and Ram Dass described connecting with her in such a way that was profoundly healing, full of the intimacy that both of them longed for. The next day, he comes to visit his mother, and his mother says, "Well, I was really high." That is an example of how quickly we are able to disown and compartmentalize experiences that might have a lot to offer. Here again, the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist has a crucial responsibility to establishing what's real. They explicitly label non-ordinary experiences and profoundly healing experiences and challenging experiences as part of the inner healing intelligence. They empathically respond to expressions, again, providing the emotional harmonization. When a person sings, then the therapist sings harmony to make the song more real, to make the sound more real, to make understanding more real, more trustworthy. If there are things to think about, if there are ways to look at the situation differently, the therapist must offer as an invitation, because we are supporting the patient's autonomy, their ability to determine what's real for them. And finally, therapists invite the patient to consider how to deepen this insight or to translate it into life. When a patient comes through the medicine and we see them the morning after, what we are trying to tell them is that this is not a drug trip. What you saw, blindfolded and surrounded by music, is real. All that new, vivid, harrowing, and redeeming beauty you found, that's life. And you can live into what you learned. Oops. Well, sounds nice, Paul, but sometimes this is hard. Why is this hard? I had spoken about this earlier. We are conditioned against being and unfolding. Psychotherapy is typically seen as something a therapist does to a patient. Yet, we are trying to do something. Freud and theorists onwards have trained their therapists to look for the right thing to say in order to produce change. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy represents a crucial change, a sea change in what the right thing is. It's not right according to an idea or according to a model. Now, what is right is what supports the patient's autonomy, what supports driving understanding. But this can be a hard thing to see and a hard thing to stick to because there are many factors that continue to force us to look for the right thing to say according to an idea, according to a manual, according to what we think people expect of us. Here are some of the factors that exert pressure on us in any therapeutic moment. Sometimes the patient's suffering drives it, often, always, the patient's suffering may drive us to do something to make it stop. Then there's also our own self-image, our need to feel functional, our need to have agency, our aversion to uncertainty, and all the unique wounding and history that makes those pressures feel very real. And that's often where analysis of the challenges of self-directed emergent healing end. But there are other factors. There's the economic systems that finance and constrain therapy. There's the fact that many therapists are working according to an insurance program and they've got 12 sessions to get done, and there's so much pressure there. There's the historical forces that frame how we see one another. I'm awestruck by the many conversations happening right now in the middle of the pandemic that negotiate identity and compel us to really see how human we see or do not see each other. And finally, as a Western civilization, we prioritize reductive and empirical knowledge. We value what we can measure. We only see what's real as anything that can be turned into a number by an objective observer. Yet therapy is so deeply intimate, it is in part beyond that knowledge. So when therapist and patient come together, the therapist must recognize that two brains are at work in working with their evolution. The therapist also has a default mode network, and that default mode network is attuned to the pressures of capitalism, history, economic uncertainty, the knowledge and the training and the socialization of being a therapist. And to create the space where inner healing intelligence can make itself known can be challenging. It's important to know this because if we do not recognize these forces, then we are prey and vulnerable to them. But if we do recognize these forces, then we can start to understand and set them aside or learn to work with them towards creating the spaces of healing. So it speaks to the importance of discernment. As I said earlier, the inner healing intelligence is a concept. It points to a practice, and that practice is a matter of supporting the healing that happens within. Therapists participate in a practice. From moment to moment, we have to decide, does saying something support self-knowledge? Does it support insight? Does it create conditions of safety? Sometimes we have to act. Sometimes we have to hold up to a patient's distress, a vision of healing. But often we have to not act. We have to learn to let a patient experience their pain fully, from which the true needs and the true power to meet those needs or name those needs may come forth. We have to do this continuously, maintaining an awareness of the dynamic and fluid intentions and responses that happen in this nonlinear, emergent, multimodal experience. And again, we must continuously convey that the session that happens when one takes medicine is real, that everything that arises in the therapy session is part of the healing process, that there's nothing that is random, that it's all effort towards adaptation and healing. To create discernment and to pursue emergence and nonlinear healing and therapy means we have to identify the difference between a paradox and a contradiction when it comes to the spirit of supporting the inner healing intelligence. A paradox, I will define right now as is the reality of things that seem to contradict each other, but recognizing that both are true. Whereas a contradiction is identifying that one aspect is much more valid than the other. So an example of a contradiction in terms of contradicting our ability to provide therapy is when we provide reflexive and defensive interpretations of the patient's behavior that actually obstructs the inner healing. When we try to force a person to a conversation about their dad, we are contradicting the spirit of the inner healing intelligence. Whereas a paradox is recognizing that things may seem contradictory, but actually are both valid, and we need to act, think, and speak and behave in a way that supports the reality of both seemingly contradictory facts. So, for example, a therapist must sometimes intervene to support the emergence of self-directed healing. Sometimes you do have to say something, often you don't. And another paradox is people come to someone else to get healing. Some people come to learn about themselves, and to learn about themselves, they come to someone else. That's a very interesting paradox. And it's important to notice that so that we can discern when is self-healing happening. This discernment, identifying the difference between paradox and contradiction, is best understood when we can measure how much our actions from moment to moment is a response to the situation that's happening in front of us, and how much it's aligned with our reason, our purpose. That felt sense of alignment could be described as integrity. How do we cultivate integrity, vision, and discernment? How do we know the different? How do we learn to tell the difference between what serves the therapy and not? How do we cultivate the idea and the vision of self-directed healing? And how do we make sure we're doing it in a way that's aligned? Well, I'd like to say that these things are all deeply connected. The attitudes and the capacities for integrity, vision, and discernment are all interlinked. If you think about how to live with integrity, then you are necessarily thinking about how to hold a vision of healing, and you are working on learning the difference between what builds integrity and what doesn't. If you are thinking about a vision of self-directed healing and liberation, then you will necessarily look into the nitty-gritty day-to-day work of integrity and inquire about discernment, the difference between what works and what doesn't. If you were looking at discernment, what is the difference between what is effective and what is not, you are necessarily going to think about, what am I trying to do here and how do I do it right? Cultivating embodied and dynamic self-knowledge in order to engage with a fluid presence is a crucial and continuous task for every therapist, but especially psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists. Again, I'm arguing here that every therapy is working to help a patient trust themselves. And in order to do that, we have to continuously identify whether our actions or non-actions is supporting a patient to understand and participate in reality. This is especially true for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapists because we are turning off the default mode network, and we are really bringing the deep inner healing intelligence out into the open, into an encounter with the ordinary consciousness of the people we serve. To actually make that discernment, to go from task to task, to decide and weigh inside our bodies and our minds what is the most appropriate, most attuned response to the moment. makes us think about our bodies. It brings us to reflect about our ideas and our histories. It calls us to trust our co-therapists, which is to say psychotherapy is a full contact sport. That's why I've got that picture of two beings juggling. I would say usually the patient is the person standing on the shoulders of the therapist. The therapist is just trying to get them across time while the patient is learning to juggle. The therapist cannot juggle for the patient. They got to do that in midair. But the therapist provides the balance, the stability, and the forward movement for this wondrous task of getting to know reality. Thus, I recommend that to refine your sense of balance in the therapeutic moment in therapeutic work, it would be valuable to bring deliberate awareness to an embodied activity, usually an activity that integrates cognitive and embodied information that can then be a practice, something that you do regularly, that you can think about, that you can feel about, that you can measure and notice and grow with. I'm going to list 2 activities that I use to cultivate my discernment, integrity, and vision as a therapist. So my favorite task every day is waking up, rolling out of bed, crawling onto my bench. Maybe I'll think of a koan or something, and then I'll just stare at a wall for an hour and a half. I've been doing that for 15 years, I think. Wow, that's a long time. Meditation is a wonderful opportunity to discover discernment because it brings us face to face with the experience of the daily moment, its contradictions, its surprising wonders, the continuity of it all. When you sit for a long enough time, you develop a tolerance of physical discomfort, of intense urges, of vivid, compelling, tempting cognition. This is the very turbulence that you experience when you do therapy, the very pull towards reinforcing your default mode network and trampling on the patient's inner healing intelligence is made of aversion, the wish to feel better. And meditation helps you not give in to that. Meditation also helps with stamina. By focusing on your breath again and again and again and again, you focus on listening to the patient again and again and again and again. You refine your ability to support and engage with the inner healing intelligence again and again and again. When you meditate, you get very acquainted with all the weird and wonderful things that happen in your body. And thus, you can develop a fluency or a language of the thoughts and the patterns and the ways of being, which is so crucial because when you recognize and when you empathically validate a patient in their self-understanding, they will hear and feel your understanding. And that understanding is consolidated by your own understanding. Meditation, as it evolves, as I've at least discovered, it helps you be really curious about this weird and wonderful life within. I think of meditation as my favorite soap opera. I just turn on Telemundo inside myself and just notice what I do. And in experiencing suffering and witnessing your own endurance and discovering all the ways you can express wonder, meditation fosters compassion, the very crucial condition of liberation. Here's Saki Santorelli in the book Heal Thyself. He says, healing is asking us to step forward, step inside the circle, not going forward or doing something that gets in the way of being inside this moment. When we step inside and wait, the right action usually makes itself known. Everything becomes clearer. Ourselves, others, and situations are seen just as they are. It sounds a lot like the inner healing intelligence, don't you think? Yoga is another iterative practice that I use and practice across my life to support my engagement with the present moment, with the patient, with the inner healing intelligence. Here's some things that I think I get out of yoga. I recognize my limits. I know when I'm about to do too much. I am receptive to that inner knowing of what works and what doesn't, feeding into the capacity of discernment. I have a sense of integrity. Integrity is a physical sensation as much as it is a cognitive and ideological continuity. I know what integrity feels like when I do When I do warrior 2, I know what integrity feels like as I'm lifting up into warrior 3. And I use the same sense of integrity to understand if I am speaking to support the inner healing intelligence or not. And finally, yoga fosters an appreciation for optimal conditions. We work in a culture that is deeply focused on pathology and brokenness. And what I have found so corrective about yoga is its deep and profound emphasis on health, on moving smoothly, continuously, and in a sense of connection to the world around us and what lies within. Here's the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita being a sacred text and one of the finest pieces of world literature I've ever come across. Krishna says this: "It is better to strive in one's own dharma than to succeed in the dharma of another. Nothing is lost in following one's own dharma, but competition in another's dharma breeds fear and insecurity." This text, which informs yoga practices as part of the Hindu tradition, is a powerful reminder and warning against trying to do something that's not yours to do. Again, trying to do therapy according to an idea rather than attending to the self-knowledge of a person in front of you with all the facts and theories that you have. There's a huge difference between trying to be the best psychodynamic psychotherapist you can be and being a therapist in support of a patient who may require simple kindness, simple listening, the space from which self-knowledge comes from. In the context of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, in this continuous task of resisting the pressure to act and change and fix, I think the idea of willingness is very helpful. It comes from dialectical behavioral therapy, which, as you may know, is a therapy developed by Marsha Linehan, informed by Zen Buddhism in the treatment of people who are typically diagnosed with borderline personality disorders, but has broadened in its indications for people who have affective disorders, impulse disorders. And I just find it's a very effective handbook to being in reality. In any case, willingness is treated by dialectical behavioral therapy as the refusal to tolerate the moment. It's the opposite of meditation. It's the opposite of yoga. And embodied practices cultivate that discernment between whether we are willful and trying to make something happen, trying to be in control, trying to focus on what's happening within us, versus willingness, which is working towards connection, working towards supporting what is all around us. I ask and I invite you to think about right now, what is willfulness like for you? What is it like for you in your body when you try to make something happen, even though it doesn't seem like it wants to? Yeah, I mean, to answer my question, I think of when I'm in deep playa and my bike breaks down and I just spent an entire night just trying to fix the bike, just trying to put the chain back on. Please, bike, just work. And at some point, just before sunrise, I realized it's not going to happen. And I need to be willful. I need to walk this bike to the trash fence and watch the sunrise. And when I did that, I had an amazing conversation with a human being that helped me rethink of Burning Man, not just as a fun party, but a profound adventure. And oh, by the way, he fixed my bike. So, okay. And here's a thought from Ian McGilchrist, a neuropsychoanalyst, that tries to link, I think, willfulness with neurophysiology. He says that the right frontal lobe is of critical importance for the emotional expression of virtually every kind of emotion. That's the one exception to the right hemisphere's superiority for the expression of emotion is anger. What's so interesting about this fact is that the left hemisphere is our abstracting hemisphere. It's the part of the brain it's the hemisphere of the brain that's responsible for deconstructing things into bits and pieces that work together in an isolated fashion. And when we are willful, we are finding that some part isn't working with our plan, and we feel angry. I encourage you to investigate when you feel willful and I suspect, I hypothesize that at the heart of that is anger. And at the heart of that anger is aversion to reality being more complex than any philosophy we can ever contain, ever. So we're about to head out of this, out of talking about psychedelic psychotherapy and into ordinary therapy. Let's talk about how you can find and support the inner healing intelligence in everyday therapy so that you're set up for the psychedelic renaissance. Again, hopefully I've made an argument that the inner healing intelligence is a concept that highlights something that's happening every day. We may have default mode networks, but we do have experiences, and therapy is an experience like traveling and beautiful music and great sex and profound modes of life that help us reformulate the way we live in the world. And in that reformulation and that opportunity to work with between the inner healing intelligence and the default mode network, we can support inner healing intelligence by noticing our very engagement in therapy. Just noticing, are we willing or willful, can make a profound difference with the patient in their trust in themselves. We are multimodal creatures. If you think about the electromagnetic spectrum, we only see a certain amount of light, but that light is all around us. And similarly, when we are in therapy, we may use words like the narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum that we see, but in sharing space, we are listening to each other, we are feeling each other's presence, we are noticing what is said and what is not said, and all of that is communication. All of that is information and a statement of whether we are taking the person seriously or not. When a person takes themselves seriously, when they're starting to get into their feelings or really thinking through their thoughts or experimenting, exploring their body, it's profoundly important to encourage experience of feeling in meaningful moments. You know what's a meaningful moment. You feel it in your body. I come back to that idea of depth in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Depth happens all the time. And when there's depth, when you feel that in your body, alignment and discernment supports us to help a person experience that fully and discover the intelligence and coherence of these deep moments. Questions we can ask involve, how do you know that? How do you know what you just said? That was so cool. What's happening in your body right now as you tell this powerful story? No theory, no great explanation needs to be inflicted on the patient. Simply the question that guides a person to witness their own intelligence as it flashes like a candle in the wind. One of the great challenges I face as a therapist is, what do I do with detours? What do I do when my patient is off topic? The first thing to do, I've learned through many painstaking moments, and my great, great, great gratitude to my patients for their patience, is to tolerate what you think is the digression. Think about what Stanislav Grof said. I would prefer to think that I don't understand. So if you don't understand, wait. See what happens if they keep talking, if you keep asking questions, if you do not act on the aversion to fix what you think is a digression. It might, and I'm finding more and more, it almost always leads to a deeper understanding. One way that I've found a greater ability to tolerate digression is to use the improv activity yes and. You're going somewhere, you think you're having an important conversation, and then suddenly it changes track. Well, what happened? Ask yourself, well, yes and. Yes, if this is true and what I'm saying is true, then how are these connected? I have found that that digressions, changes in subject, often are more pieces of information, a different angle, the opportunity for a reframe, or a sign that our patient needs our help or support. And when there's ambiguity, when a patient doesn't know what the hell's going on, when they lose track, encourage them to think. Create a little psychedelic experience where you encourage them to let their inner healing intelligence come up with something. Psychoanalysis had it right. What comes up? What does that remind you of? What are you thinking about right now? Okay. I'm so honored to be a part of this moment in history. I think psychedelic medicine can represent a sea change in the way we relate to ourselves, each other, how we know. And I want to suggest that we're coming to the end of this session, that you could think of these bigger, broader questions, just ride way past the trash fence into the other domains of human being. I said earlier that the inner healing intelligence, I think, is made of the same stuff as art. So, how is being in the groove, listening to the muse, finding flow, how are they related? And if there is a wisdom, if there is a profound order to the way our nonlinear experiences know and unfold our healing, well, how does that line up and rhyme with wisdom and mystic knowledge that have been passed down for centuries and only recently have been thoroughly distrusted by Western capitalism and post Enlightenment knowledge? Science, I mean, Robert Carter Harris is going to probably produce a beautiful Jacques Cousteau documentary on, like, what the mind is. But hey, like, let's be curious about that too. Where can we take that? What as we discover more and more how inner healing intelligence works and how that works clinically, can that guide the kinds of questions we can ask in neurophysiology? Can that help us figure out what neuroimaging might be relevant to discerning the integrated, chaotic, flowing aspects of intelligence, the default mode network, and otherwise? And finally, I think it's really important to think about the political implications and influences on the inner healing intelligence. How does the paradigm of psychedelic medicine and mainstreaming of psychedelic medicine align or compete with views of psychedelic experience and work as social and cultural medicine? Social and cultural medicine, that's a term that's not mine. It comes, I think Scott Batchy described it in an amazing talk about capitalism and psychedelics. If you go to Shakruna's YouTube channel, there's a discussion on capitalism, systemic issues. Will they emerge in psychedelic medicine and practices? We are not practicing in a vacuum. What we do, what we discover may shape the society that we find ourselves in, and how society exists shapes what we do. I came away from that talk thinking about the fact that individual healing is pulling people out of river, and psychedelic assisted medicine is wonderful because we're actually helping people pull themselves out of the river. But then what's pushing people into the river in the first place? I think that's a profound question. I think the natural conclusion of compassion is justice, and the fulfillment of healing is equity for all. And it's my hope that that's what this Renaissance offers to us: a chance to re-examine the world we share and to help it be one we truly share. So just a plug for that talk. I think it's amazing. And only 959 people saw it. Please see it. Wonderful talk. My great respect to all of the panelists. And this is a picture of my favorite temple. I'm so grateful again to talk to you. Thank you so much for listening. I live my life working to get from the front lines of reactivity to the depths of being. And I offer these thoughts, this wish, so that we can bring the playa everywhere, so that everyone we meet can be like someone we see in the desert, so that everyone we meet can be like family, and so that everywhere we go can be home. Thank you very much. I'm treating this like the playa. I want to hear from you. If you want to say hi, if you want to talk, please reach me at my email address at paul.uy, U for unicorns, Y for yuck, at mail.utoronto.ca. I appreciate your attention, and I wish you the very best always.
Thank you, Paul. That was really, really beautiful. And I've heard this talk before, which is why I really wanted to record it with you. And I'm so authentic that in my sharing of this, like, it truly is like having a spiritual experience. So I was really grateful to have the time and space to digest even more of the message that you have to share with the world. A few of my favorites: meditation is like my favorite soap opera. If that isn't a selling feature, I don't know what is, you know?
Oh, it's so fun.
What a
So
great
bad.
way to regard it and to create that bridge, you know, between meditation and yoga and other contemplative practices and the practice of psychotherapy. Just so beautiful. Another nugget that I really appreciated was that, you know, I'm not going to get it quite right, but that the client and their inner healing intelligence are like the lead singer, and we offer the harmony, that buoyancy, so that they can keep trusting that flow and moving forward with that flow towards oneness, wholeness. It's such a beautiful metaphor, you know, and it really does, I feel like, take the pressure off that part of me that wants to be the perfect psychotherapist for my client. You know, it's like I'm I can be the current, or I can, you know, the wind and the sails,
Mm.
like like Bruce Poulter says, you know, which is, I really love that metaphor too. And when things are ambiguous, help patients to create a little psychedelic experience. I really like that. I mean, it increases access for people who can't have access or wouldn't have access for whatever reason. I thought, yeah, like we can do that. We absolutely do that
Mm-hmm.
by bringing to mind these principles and trying to put them into action, you know, without
Yes.
forcing it. That was so beautiful. And then finally, the one that really struck me the deepest was that question. And it brings me to tears, honestly. Like, what are the metaphysical implications of an inner healing intelligence? And that's a question that I experience resistance to, you know, because there's just something about it that feels really, really big and
Yeah.
really powerful and really hard to digest. And yet I I'm gonna carry that question with me and lean into it, because I think the answer is nothing short of magical. Yeah, so
Chills, chills. I
thank you.
doubt I, if I have, I
What?
just,
Yeah.
you know, I want everybody to know too, like our dialogue, our communication, our mutual appreciation is a crucial. If another way to bring respect and reverence to the inner healing intelligence is to deeply appreciate and respect the people you're with.
Yeah.
And you've shown me that so many times, since I'm like seriously on the cusp of tears just thinking about the first time. I just want everybody to know I killed this talk so hard, mostly because I just wanted to do Adele proud. I just
Oh
wanted
my
her to know. She asked me to do something and I just want to kill it when friends ask me to do something. So I spent way more time than I got paid for to think about this. And it became a gift for me. But what guided me was to give this gift to one of my best friends.
God.
And thank you. Please, everybody find someone who makes you feel like Michael Jordan.
Ah! Oh, my heart is just, you know, in receipt of your love and flow right back to you. Thank you for sharing the gift of you with everyone watching during this event, but also everyone who will have the opportunity to watch this in the future. This talk, to me, I feel it should be essential for all psychotherapists to really
Hmm.
reflect on these topics, as well as for prospective clients to get an understanding of what it is they should be looking for in
Yes.
the kind of conversations that they can be having with their psychotherapist to co-create the space that they feel will be most suited to bring out
Ah,
that inner healer. So
absolutely.
until next time, my friend.
Until next time.